everybody, it's Drybear. People are reaching max level in Throne and Liberty, and people have been asking for my tank build that I've been using to clear all of the endgame hard mode dungeons as a PvE tank. So that's what we're gonna go over today. So there are a couple really good build websites for Throne and Liberty. The one that I'm using right now is questlog.gg, so I have my full build here, and this isn't gonna be like your perfect epic 1 or best in slot epic 1 or epic 2 set. This is just a very accessible set of gear that you can get once you hit level 50, mostly blues on the cloak as well as the accessories. You have your heroic resistance gear, which is very easy to get and drops almost everywhere. And you also have the Karnix Netherblade, which comes from Death's Abyss, another very straightforward weapon to get. Even if you don't get the drop from Death's Abyss, you can get the Soul Shard tokens, which is the pity system, which allows you to get the sword and shield from crafting rather than the hard drop. But either way, you should be able to, within a week, even if you're super unlucky, get this full setup ready to go and be able to do all of the hard mode dungeons with ease. So I'm going to use that guide as a reference if you want to have the whole build and looking for just the information. Let's quickly walk through all the abilities and how to use them, and then we'll walk through how to implement it all in the dungeon itself. So depending on the dungeon that you're running, you might swap some of these skills out. I think it's very important that you have enough threat generation to keep the targets on you, and the better your party gets, the more aggro they're going to pull away from you, which means you need enough aggro to pull from them. Some of the best abilities for threat come from sword and shield, but you will also get some from the great sword as well. We're going to be running mostly sword and shield abilities with a couple great swords in here that just work perfectly for that tank setup. Keep in mind, it gets a little confusing because these abilities, once you specialize in them, they change their icon and name. So once you have these specialized here, like if I were to go to Piercing Strike and remove this one here, it turns back into Shield Strike. So if you normally see Shield Strike here and you're wondering what the other one is, this Piercing Strike, that's what happens when you specialize into it. So this is the specialization screen here for both of the weapons. And again, I have this in the build screen that we just showed. But we are going to take Shield Strike, turn it into Piercing Strike for Sword and Shield. And while you're leveling, this is probably your best ability. I recommend getting this probably to like epic 1 while you're leveling because it does a ridiculous amount of damage. When you modify it for Shield Strike into Piercing Strike, it has this big shockwave that comes out behind and does damage to all targets behind. So it's very good for building threat, and you can also modify it to get even more on top of that, right? So you can get some aggro increase on this with the modifier and the shockwave in front. So remember, you're just kind of lining it up, and you would be surprised how wide this shockwave actually is. It's very easy for picking up mobs and grabbing aggro when you really need to if you line it up properly. Next, we're going to grab Strategic Rush. This is normally the ability, and we're going to upgrade it with Range Widened, which turns it into Strategic Rush with this icon here. This ability is so flexible. It gives you so much freedom. It is just a basic charge forward. You move forward like that, but it allows you to reposition mobs that are not push immune, which is super helpful. So you can get behind a mob, stand behind them, push them back into the pack, and group all the mobs together, especially when casters are staying far away from the group. Next, we're going to take Valiant Brawl from Greatsword, and this one is super straightforward, and it's very nice to use. You'll have to use this as an offhand because you'll be using the sword and shield normally, but when you do Valiant Brawl, you get this multi-hit on it, but we can actually specialize into it, which gives us an opportunity to add aggro. And again, you're probably not going to have any of these aggro specializations needed when leveling or doing basic dungeons, but when you start getting to the hard mode dungeons at the very end, like the 1-star, 2-star, you're going to get to a point where your DPS are doing so much damage, you're actually start losing aggro at very important parts, and you're going to need to start building up more aggro throughout the fight. For your next 3 abilities, you can swap in a couple different ones depending on your preference. For basic dungeons, I like running with Shield Throw. It is a very easy way to pull mobs from a distance. So you run with Shield Throw here, you can throw it forward, you can throw it through, and you can hit targets. You'll generate a lot of threat on those targets and also be able to, get aggro at the very beginning of a fight, which is super useful. You can run with a Shield Throw to get that one moving as well. And I also really like having the Chain ability here, which doesn't normally called Chain Hook, but when you upgrade it to Controlling Rake. So this one is a straightforward attack. You throw a chain out. If it can, it pulls you to the target or pulls the target to you. However, if you turn it into Controlling Rake, this is an AoE pull. This is one of my favorite abilities when you're using it in dungeons, because anything that gets hit by this projectile when you're shooting it out, if they get marked by it, they will all get pulled into you. You'll see it's actually just this rock hand that goes forward and pulls them all back. So what I'll normally do is I'll get like the ranged mobs, I'll push the ranged mobs into the melee mobs. If anything's still sticking out, I'll throw out the Controlling Rake and pull all the mobs in together, and then you can just start AoEing everything in an area around you, and you've got permanent aggro, and everyone can just AoE freely. But for some of the harder dungeons, you might need to run Blood Devotion instead of one of those other 2, which allows you to tank damage for a single target or potentially even a group of allies as well. So if you modify Blood Devotion, you can actually make it so it takes damage for those. This isn't always necessary because most of the time, especially in hard mode dungeons, if everyone's doing the mechanics properly, you shouldn't need to take damage for anyone, but you could be able to save someone's life if they get into a stuck spot. Like if they step on something and get stunned and they're standing in the middle of AoE or something, you can absorb damage for them using Blood Devotion with a long cooldown, but it can actually save the day. The next no-brainer is Provoking Roar. This is one of your best abilities because it's going to guarantee that the target you have aggro on the target. So once you pull everything in with your controlling rake, or you push it in with your charge, you can just pop this AoE shout and everything around you is guaranteed to attack you. And we're going to go ahead and modify it as well so that we have a little bit extra duration on it. So we have longer duration on that. And this is also one of your best ways to get aggro back if someone steals it from you at a very important point where the boss needs to be attacking you. Just pop your Provoking Roar, make sure it's on you for that period. Next, we're going to take Stunning Blow from Greatsword. And this is something you'll notice for all of the hard mode dungeons and even some of the open world activities is you really need to have a single target stun in your kit. And this is because there's tons of mechanics in all of the hard mode dungeons that if you don't stun a target before they get a cast off, they will destroy the whole group, or you need to stun something to interrupt it or remove immunity or something like that. You need to have an on-demand single target stun in your kit. And Stunning Blow is great because not only does that fill that requirement, but we can also modify it to give us a little more threat generation as well. So we can very easily build this up to add threat and also be able to stun the target very easily. So anytime you hear a target like the Arbiters in Death's Abyss or something, you can hit them, stun them, prevent them from blowing up the whole party and carrying on about your business. The next 5 abilities are abilities that are just meant for keeping you alive or mostly just for controlling the battle. The first one is going to be one of my favorite abilities, Da Vinci's Courage. This is a great sword ability, but when you modify it, it increases your maximum health, health regen, and attack speed, and you can also give really nice buffs to your party. If you combine together the Great Fury modification for Stalwart as well as Da Vinci's Courage, you can give your party a huge boost in damage, and part of playing tank properly in PvE endgame for Throne and Liberty is not only being able to absorb damage, hold aggro, but also provide buffs and healing and support for your team, because you're not just a tank in these kind of encounters. So Da Vinci's Courage is very straightforward. It has a massive range, as you can see here. All you have to do is pop it. What it'll do is it'll add max HP and give a nice regen and some attack speed to targets. You want to use this for, like, if you get pulled in for a big AoE, or if you have some kind of mechanic where you're going to take a lot of damage, you can give max health to all your party members or raid members or guild members so that they don't go down from extra damage as that comes through. And very easily as well, we're going to modify this one so that we can just get increased duration, instant healing, so it recovers 200% of base damage plus 200 with a heal. So it increases max HP and it heals the target, and it also gives them damage reduction for the duration, and it gives them health regen, and it gives them attack speed. It is a crazy group-wide buff, and you want to use this at the right time to keep your team alive. Next is going to be Counter Barrier, which is your bread and butter. This is like your primary mitigation ability. This is one you want to use basically on cooldown to always have duration up for increasing your shield block chance, giving you evasion, and also give you attack range and things like that. So this is going to look like this if you have the cooldown on it, and anytime you see the shield, anyone's going to know that tank is now taking less damage, and you want to have this for most of the time, and basically anytime you're about to take any damage, you want to lean on this. You have another option which could be good if you have really good gear. So for Counter Barrier, sometimes it's good to run Concentrated Barrier. What this does is it turns some of the damage you take into a reflect into the enemy, so you can actually do some decent damage with this and deal it back to the target. But if you really want to, you can also just run Countdown with the damage increase, which gives you a good amount of reuse of this because it lowers the cooldown every time you use Shield Strike, which we're going to be using a lot. Another one of my favorite abilities along with the Da Vinci's Courage is going to be Great Fury, which of course primarily before you modify it is Stalwart Bastion. This one is absolutely awesome. You can save the day with this so many different ways. So the way Stalwart Bastion works normally is that when you activate it, it gives damage reduction for you and your party members for a couple seconds. It allows you to, if your party members just got pulled in, you can pop this up. Anyone in this area for this duration is going to take less damage, and it can save a party with a big AoE, big wipe. There's plenty of mechanics in the dungeons and even some of the world bosses where you can absorb damage for nearby targets and they can be saved by that. However, when we modify modify it, we can make it even better because we can add in Great Fury so that not only does it apply damage reduction for you and anyone around you, but also increases their skill damage at the same time. So when you modify this, it becomes Great Fury instead of Stalwart Bastion, and when targets come nearby, you pop it. You can use it as a damage burst to get through DPS windows that are really hard, or you can use it as a defensive option, or both, depending on how you place yourself. Next up is Blessing of Immortality, and this one is just an easy way for you to increase your HP. This one will require special growth books to level up and keep it moving, but it is something that you'll want to keep an eye on and keep it functioning because it will allow you to stay alive. At default, it gives you a barrier of max HP, and you combine this by if you pop with your Da Vinci's Courage first, and then go into your Blessing of Immortality, you're ready to go. So we can level this one up and get some value out of that. Then we can add health regen, and then Blessing of Immortality allows a friendly target to gain the benefit as well. This is a very easy way to do this, and I've actually found as well, there's like some minor iframes on it. So if you feel like you're about to be knocked up, you can actually pop this ability right as the target hits you, and you'll be able to avoid some of that. It takes a little practice, but you can get through it quite easily. And lastly is Willbreaker. I actually used to run with Annihilating Slash as an option for this, but you don't actually need to. It's just helpful to have the extra aggro generation from Willbreaker. You can get multiple hits and even more damage from Annihilating Slash, and you can even run with a shot at victory if you wanted some extra damage as well. But I think in general, if you have a good group and you're focusing on tanking, you just need the extra aggro generation to max this out. And then I like having the damage area change, which makes this from a cone attack into a large AoE. So it's great when you pull targets in and then you push them in, and then you can spin around with your Willbreaker and you've got aggro. So when we put this all together into the end game dungeons, all you're really trying to do is keep your sword and great sword abilities on cooldown so you can make sure you generate enough damage and aggro to keep the target on you. And then you want to be keeping your counter barrier on cooldown as well to focus on absorbing damage. Then you're looking for opportunities to either use Stunning Blow if a target needs to be interrupted or you need to get a little bit extra damage on them as well. And then you also have your Bastion as well as your other tank abilities to absorb for targets on top of that. I have noticed that a lot of times when it comes to tanking in this game is it's more just about positioning and having the right time for these. And you'll have to learn the special mechanics in each of the end game dungeons so you can get it right. Some encounters are going to require you to use your shield. So if you're doing the Chimera dungeon, you'll be able to grab into the Chimera and then absorb 2, maybe 3 fireballs if you use all of your cooldowns at once. I should also mention that the Guardian that you want to be using is one of the first ones that you get, the Vampire Slayer Ezekiel. There's actually some good damage coming out from some of these. Like you can actually use Shade Revenant if you wanted to. In some cases, you can use the Lady Knight Kamarshi, but I would actually use Vampire Slayer because all this does is when you have your Guardian active, it's a 10-minute cooldown, very big cooldown. It increases all your defense and deals damage over time to targets around you and restores HP. It gives you a vampiric aura. So you increase massive damage, defense increase, as well as a health restore, which makes tanking super easy. So if you get into a really tough spot, you can pop your Guardian state while you're just doing your normal. You can pop up your defense, your shields, get everything going that way, get your Da Vinci's, and then you can even just guard to try and keep that there, and you're able to hold a lot of damage and aggro to keep your party moving. But there's definitely going to be times where you really are going to take a bunch of damage and you need to be prepared to tank it. So one of these is the paralyzing poison from this dungeon, the Temple of Slaughter. You'll see me pop up all my cooldowns here, try to take at least 2 fireballs from this mechanic, and then maybe even 3 to try and soak that all up. We even talk about Blood Devotion as well as an option, which can be very useful in some encounters, like in Cursed Wasteland, where you know there's going to be a lot of AoE damage coming out of Shy Kyle. He has a bunch of splash damage. Some people get caught in the breath. This fight gets super chaotic and super annoying. So a lot of times being able to tank damage for a target or even increase their HP with Da Vinci's Courage gives you a lot of really easy freedom. Then when you're doing basic mobs, this is where I would really recommend using your shield throw if you have it equipped, your controlling rake as well, and then your shield rush, your charge that pushes mobs around. You can very easily position. You can use the push to get targets into a wall and stun them if they're not push immune, interrupt casts, interrupt fury attacks as well, and also push in casters that may be separated. And this can help your group stay very efficient as well. Sometimes there's casters that sit really far away. Sometimes there's assassins that blink between targets and get far away from the group. So if you can grab them in with the rake and pull them towards you to keep you in the group as well, and then stun them there, and then group all the melees and ranges together, it can create a lot of opportunity for your group to be able to spread out and burn targets down to be super efficient on their clears. For passives, I love grabbing almost all of the shield and the sword and shield passives, and then 2 of the specific great sword passives. The robust constitution gives you max HP and health regen, which is massive, and then the victor's morale gives you some mana regen as well as some health regen, which helps you a lot. The mana regen is mostly going to be for targets that you really burn through mana a lot, but it's just the HP that comes back that's super useful. And then almost all of the shield passives, getting a little bit of evasion onto that as well, some defense to you as well, on top of getting extra some provoke on top of everything and extending the duration, which allows you to maintain targets that are taking a lot of damage. You can also increase your CC resistance for some encounters, can be really rough, and as well as getting impenetrable gives you even more defenses depending on how many are around you when you do those really big pulls. And then of course getting collision onto target to reduce the remaining cooldowns, which is super useful for your long cooldowns like Blood Devotion or your Blessing of Immortality or your Great Fury, which is your stalwart modifier. These have long cooldowns, so having cooldown reduction is super useful. Now, what I want to talk about next is going to be the skill progression. You'll notice that all of my skills here are level 1. I've been able to clear all of the endgame dungeons without leveling up any of my skills, and that's primarily because when you level skills, one of the most harshly guarded resources in this game is the growth books. These are hard to get. The higher level ones are very difficult, but they make a big difference. So you don't actually need to. Again, I've been able to clear all of the hardest content in the game without leveling any of my skills, and that's because I plan to switch weapons to a lot of different weapons, which means I won't have enough resources to do multiple builds except for 1 or 2 if I spend my resources. So I've proven that you can do it without leveling the abilities, but let's talk about what you can level to make sure that you're at your best for this specific build. The first one I would level is Robust Constitution. This is a very easy win, getting you max HP, and I also would level this while you're leveling up in the game as well. Max HP goes a long way in keeping you alive and keeping you moving. For abilities, I would level the Piercing Strike / Shield Strike first. This one has crazy damage scaling, very low cooldown, super strong. Next, I would do Valiant Brawl. It's a very easy way to do single target damage, and again, will help you while leveling. Then I would level up Aegis Shield, and this will give you a lot of nice defense, and from there, it's kind of just getting the rest of the skills up. You'll get a lot of value from putting points into Counter Barrier, a lot of value by putting points into Da Vinci's Courage, as well as some of your defensive options, like your long-term defensive options like Great Fury / Stalwart Bastion, or even putting things into your Blessing of Immortality if you have the precious skill growth book Omnipotence, which these abilities here are going to be a little bit harder to level until you've started collecting more of the end game books that allow you to level it up. And once you start completing your build, like getting your build to a good point, you can start pushing into Evasion. Evasion is a stat. Generally, people push either Endurance or Evasion. Evasion allows you to avoid the ability altogether. Endurance allows you to avoid an effect in certain cases. Most people go Endurance if you're unsure, but if you're gonna go Evasion, like melee specific evasion is insanely good for tanks, but you need a lot of it stacked together, and that's usually more once you start finishing your build to get that all stacked up. So you can save some of these for later in the game, but then start getting some very small wins in the very beginning. And even if you really want to, if you don't have as much gear, you can swap out Victor's Morale for Indomitable Armor to get even more defense there, which is kind of nice. The health regen is good depending on how good your healer is, but you can also swap that for Beast there. Then I would get some cooldown reduction on Morale Boost, and then just start finishing out the rest of your abilities. Things like your Will Breaker to get a little bit extra on that, Stunning a Blow, which is really nice. Again, you don't really need stun duration on this ability. The big thing here is really just being able to stun at all to interrupt the mobs that get in your way. And that's the build. The video is already too long as it is, so I'm gonna stop it there. I have the full build linked in the comments and the description if you're looking for that, and hopefully this helps people get off the ground and get into tanking for end game progression. Doing all of the hard mode dungeons is super fun, and I think the PvE in this game is something that probably should be highlighted more, as it is a blast whether you have a group pre-made or you're just doing a solo, because I've been doing all of mine as pugs anyways. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.